Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a bit of a crazy day once again in the U.S. of A. Uh, we don't half step with it, though. You know what I'm saying? We're going to take that full step and go right to revolt. I'm not going to dig too deep into it. You know, it was predictable. It was obviously going to happen. To me, it was obvious they were going to allow it to happen. It creates outrage on both sides, which is, again, as far as I can tell, it's all the elite care about. Keep them as divided and as outraged as possible because they distracted by the outrage and they divided and they can't work together. And it's meant for us to see all things in a polarizing way. You know? And when you have two different stories feeding two different groups of people for a decade plus, and Fox News has been around longer for that, but the right-wing conservative media and the left-wing liberal media report everything from a different slant. And some of that's kind of cute and innocent in a way, but it's still designed to make every little incident look completely different to two groups of people. And they're both fueled by the outrage and fueled by the distraction, and it allows the status quo to remain for the power structures that be. It castrates democracy from having the power of unity in order to effect change, and that is the only engine behind all of it. There's people who knew right away that, oh, if this guy fuels his followers and they march on the White House, that's going to be some good stuff. Yeah, we got to let that happen. You know, and it might look unfair compared to what we did with Black Lives Matter. Yep, we know. That's the point. We want it to look unfair and unequal. We want people to see two Americas. And people are like, well, there's two. Yeah, they want there to be two Americas. You don't have two separate news entities telling two very different stories for decades and not have there be some underlying economic engine behind it saying we want there to be two different realities for you to live in. So you must choose a side, and every issue that comes along, we will make it so that you have to pick a side. And the fact that the Senate's 50-50 split right now, think about it. You know how carefully they got to maneuver the media machine to make the political process that castrated and that ineffectual? It's good. Most of the things that have happened, I think, in the last few weeks have been positive, a return back to normalcy. But that doesn't mean the poor man wins by any stretch of the imagination. It just means we'll have less of this chaos that this last guy instigated. Kudos to him on some level for being willing to call his own shots at times, but they were always so from the hip and made to benefit him and his friends and buddies. And he used so much hate and vitriol and fear-mongering among his base to affect the things he wanted to enact, and I can't stand behind that. I can even overlook your immoral choices, lifestyles, verbiage, but the way you've used hate and fear to fuel your platform, it makes it tough to align with anything you say. And then on top of it, the sociopath behavior, unable to accept defeat, needing to still be spoken about, and needing to have people say they love you and I'll die for you. That's nuts. That's nuts. And he fomented these people into going there to the White House yesterday, and he left a lot of white people with criminal records now that he's not going to give a shit about. It just stroked his ego seeing these people care enough about me to go walk into a building, and they were allowed to walk in. The Confederate flag finally got to fly in the Capitol building. I can't be too worked up about it, though. You know what I mean? It could have been prevented if they had wanted to prevent it. But obviously the power structure that is did not want to prevent it. It's cute that you thought you could stop a vote by marching some redneck hillbillies up into the Capitol building. It's kind of cute. Oh, if they don't vote, I'm still president. Clown shoes, man. You're just clown shoes. And the rest of the world's looking at us and laughing. You know, but that's what we get for putting an egotistical reality TV star in a place of public power. And just what an embarrassing mess it's been. And the problem is, though, even going forward, there's still two stories. You know, I mean, you're still trying to braid together two Americas. And the ironic thing about it is, as a Canadian living in America for 30 years, and as a guy who's spoken to people from almost every country in the world, I'm a geography nut, I love talking to people from everywhere. The American political spectrum is right of center. The entire spectrum exists right of center. There's not really a left here. Bernie Sanders, for all his liberal fear-mongering, his liberal extremism, is kind of a centrist in a European sense. If you look at Denmark and Iceland and New Zealand and even Canada, Sanders isn't this extreme. He's a moderate centrist liberal on the left side of things, but he's considered an extremist. The American liberal is right of center. The American conservative is right of center, and they're not that far apart. Economically, ideologically, they're very similar. They think the same things about Russia, China, and Cuba. They have the same feelings about Iran, Muslims, and black people. They have the same image of America being the savior of the world and the deliverer of freedom. They have both been brainwashed that they are the only ones who have freedom, when they're kind of some of the least free people in the world, living in as much fear and ignorance as they do. But they're not that different left and right in America. It takes a full-blown media effort to dissect and delineate the gap between these two groups. And sadly, so much of it's still brought about by race. You know, the urban American lives in diversity, so even urban whites have more empathy and are more comfortable around diversity and recognize that there needs to be some stability, and we have to deal with poverty, we have to deal with schools and education. And the American conservative is mostly a rural, isolated person who, by not of their own doing, has been taught to be afraid, and fear becomes hate. And so they both have these channels that they both watch religiously, and because of certain political stances, things like abortion, immigration, these people don't wander and channel switch. They don't go to the other side and see what do they think, what's their side of it. And both sides of the coin are often just talking heads, yelling and screaming about distraction issues. Never the real issues at hand, never about healthcare and education and infrastructure. It's always some politicized, social, non-federal government to be involved policy making that has just diminished this republic so greatly. But let's be honest, America was always built on the great crimes of slavery and the genocide of the Native American people. So there's not a whole lot of nobility that you can go, oh, this was just always been such a noble enterprise until recently. It's always been knee-deep in blood, you know, and freedom has always been a bit of a token, a word that we throw in your face a lot, so that you never get too much to thinking about reducing my freedom as an entrepreneur, as a wealthy robber baron. No, you believe in freedom, don't you? Good. Keep that government small. You gotta be afraid of government because they're gonna manipulate you, and all they really care about is government not being able to put any grip on them. And boy, we've been just suckered by that stuff. We've been just blinded by, oh, I'm free, freedom, small government, I want to be free. Government's not there to take away your freedom. Big business capitalism has been creating that lie for a century now. You know, they've perpetrated through the entire school system what freedom looks like. And it's just a mess. At some point, though, I'm watching one of the greatest soap operas in history unfold. You know, may you live in interesting times, is an old saying. And boy, we got that. We got in some interesting times. And my last comment on this whole thing is the orange thing ain't going to go away. he's going to want his name in the headlines every day of the next year. That's what his ego needs. He needs that affirmation of, I'm important, people love me, gotta hear my name. And so I'm going to guess in 2021, a week won't go by without this dude stirring the pot, pouring some gas on it, saying and doing things to foment his base that he ain't going to let go of. You know, the Republican Party's got a mess on its hands because they need to pull some of these people back towards the center, away from this nationalism and the insane ideology that white America's under attack. There's most people in this world that would trade places with these white Americans under attack. Your privilege goes a long way, motherfucker. Believe that. Believe that. But we're going to move on. We listened to a great Bill Hardman record. This is one of those last sad boys I've been trying to find. I'm down to 5 sad boys now I'm trying to track down. And that's of the first 150. I have the first 100, and in the next 50, there's still 5 titles in there that I'm trying to track down. But this was one of them, and I got this one recently from Japan. 1958 with Coltrane, Doug Watkins, Louis Hayes, and Tommy Flanagan, Wilbur Harden. Harden's a great trumpet player. Reminds me somewhat of Kenny Dorham. He's in that same kind of tonality. Plays with the same kind of force. He's not one of the brightest players, but he's not like a super muted player either. He's kind of a fairly middle of the road tone and volume to what he's pushing out. He's a very interesting player. He's quite melodic and rhythmic. He's got a nice pulse to him, I find, a lot of times. And it's interesting hearing Coltrane in 1958. You know, he's been kind of through his whole 57 sheets of sound thing. He's working with Monk. And he does 3 or 4 sessions as a sideman at Savoy in 58. And probably a couple at Blue Note maybe as well. Yeah, probably 57, 58. He's doing the Blue Note side work plus Blue Trains in there. And he's also working with Miles at this time too. So Coltrane was a busy guy in 57, 58. It really thins out for him once he goes on his own in 60, 61, 62, 63. But then you have 1965 where the guy makes 30 records, it seems like, including live stuff and alternate takes of entire records. It's a pretty profound catalog for Coltrane, 1965. But here in 58, he's still very much developing, but he adds an urgency and a real ferocity to this session that you can tell this guy has some profit in him, and he wants to go chant down Babylon. You can tell, is already kind of on that mission. And the other players are all legendary Hallmark players, but Coltrane has that feel when he comes on that, okay, this guy's going on to big things. And I think it's pretty obvious when you hear him play. You know, there's just that intensity to him. So that's what we're listening to in the background. I have an interesting little thing I'm going to kind of run by you guys here. I was listening to a lot of Parker last few days. And one of the things I love about Parker is how melodic and structured he actually is. In spite of all his innovation, in spite of all the extra notes that he heard and played and slipped in, they always remain within a context. They always remain melodically centered and have a nice fluidity to them. He's not just forcing notes out there like a lot of his imitators started to do. And it's an interesting thing because you have to recognize that bebop in the hands of Parker isn't this mathematical construct that's incredibly complex. To him, it was a byproduct of endless rehearsing and practicing and playing and being in swing bands for decades. The guy had played his butt off. And he knew his scales left and right. And so almost out of boredom, when he'd be playing a tune from the songbook, he would just start throwing those scales in on top of the chords of the song. And if it's an A and a D and then a G, he's doing that A and then that D flat and that G. He's adding all the different notes of those scales. And being able to solo fluidly and not missing the chord changes. But the song structure still kind of remains. And because he's playing the scale within the key of the song, all the notes kind of resolve back into the melody of the song and doesn't really escape or become out. Out is beyond the song structure. And bebop, for most of its definition, is still within the song structure, the melody structure, the chord structure. It's just Parker, in a very natural way, started flying through entire scales and being so good at it, it was mind-boggling. It takes Dizzy Gillespie to come along and mathematically equate what he was doing. And for a lot of beboppers, it is a kind of a cerebral, heavily concentrated thing. For Parker, it feels just effortless. And great innovation usually is effortless to those who innovate. Those who imitate have to sit down and go, what the heck did they just do? And boy, Parker's is a revelation. You know, and bebop in his hands has always still got a nice melodic center, and the underlying song melody is often somehow present still. And it got me to thinking about how in some ways jazz music is a bit like painting by numbers. And let's take a song like All of Me, or just any song from the song with Gershwin, you know, any of them. Doesn't matter. Let's say that's a paint by numbers giraffe. When they play it, when they perform it in their traditional setting, outside of jazz, it's just the song. It's just a giraffe. Jazz is a paint by numbers proposition. And so it says, okay, I see the numbers of the colors and the outlines, and the earliest renditions of jazz were pretty much still painting within the lines and the colors, and it was still very much just a giraffe. Armstrong, for all his brilliant innovation, the songs they played were still the songs. You never did recognize what he was playing. Swing era comes along, and it starts adding really bright, vibrant colors. And it's simple in how it schemes its colors, and it might even change some of the paint by numbers spacing in order to have a bigger, brighter, bolder color here and some softer colors here to create those accents and offsets. But swing was still a giraffe. Bebop comes along, and Parker's still within the lines of the giraffe. However, the different numerical colored sections, he starts adding and improvising his own, more minimalized within those lines, extra colors, extra little lines, and he enhances and creates his own inspired version of the giraffe based off the framework of the color by numbers, but he's enhanced it with his own added dimensions. And so the entire giraffe now has all these extra colors and details, and if anything, the giraffe has become a more realistic, complex giraffe. Hardbop comes along and says, you know what? We're going to leave the head of the giraffe as the original paint by numbers intended it to be, so that you know exactly that we are playing that song. You still know it's a giraffe. The head looks like a giraffe. There's no interesting colors that would not be on a giraffe in a hard bop rendition. However, in the rest of the giraffe's body, we're going to do some what bebop taught us and add some lines and colors. But we're still within the giraffe. It's still a giraffe. It's just got some mauve in there. Some fuchsia on the hooves. They add some color and dimension, but they left the head a giraffe. And so it's still a giraffe, and we can still recognize the underlying song that's being done. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. In modern jazz, a guy like Monk comes along, and he almost Picasso-ifies the giraffe. He takes a block of black and just drops it in squarely in the middle. And he takes a block of orange and chunks it on the neck. And he takes a couple small blocks of black and drops them over top the orange to create pattern. But it's almost blockist or cubist and abstract, but it's still within the lines of the framework of the giraffe. So we still kind of recognize that this is a giraffe with some interesting impressionistic cubes and shapes and blocks and color patterns, but it still somehow makes sense. And then Free and the Avant-Garde come along, and they simply say, you know what, we don't want to draw a giraffe. And even if we may start with a giraffe, we're going to color over these lines. We're going to change the reality. We're going to change the background. And we might just do a zebra instead. Because composition becomes their tool. And so they kind of abandon the traditional giraffe paint by numbers, and it becomes just almost abstract splashes of color and very postmodern with its own interpretation and its own conveyance of expression. In a way, a guy like Mingus, his compositions actually strive harder to stay within the lines. And so when you hear him do his songs, even though there might be some abstract, weird things going on, his compositions are still fairly important. So they still stay kind of within the lines and the shapes. And you'll hear his stuff performed pretty much the same. You know, it's not like every Hong Kong squawk's going to be the same with a Mingus group, but when they play those tracks, they're going to sound like those tracks and be recognizable. In the next element of the free going into the new thing with guys like Coltrane in that period, it becomes to the point where the lines, the animal that we're drawing, it all will change from every time I put pen to paper. I'm going to color this thing different every time I approach it, and there's no point even pretending there's a giraffe there. I'm just going to express through my utensil a different image every time that sometimes might look like melody and a real being. Other times it might just be completely an impressionistic splash of color, shape, and design. But the giraffe is no longer. Soul jazz comes along, and soul jazz says, you know what? We've only got 3 or 4 crayons, so we're just going to do a very simple, within the lines coloring, shading of that giraffe. We're not even going to darken it too much. We're just going to make it real simple. A couple basic colors, and it's going to be a giraffe again. Giraffe is back. And then when you start looking at stuff like the fusion era, they have kind of the carcass of the avant-garde and the free. And especially when you start thinking about some of the stuff Miles and some of those real dense compositions that were happening in fusion at that time. Again, the giraffe, it's almost like they're processing the body parts of the giraffe. And now we have giraffe steaks, some giraffe blankets, but it's so removed from what the giraffe was. And then electronic music, like a Saint Germain. Well, I like that stuff a lot. That stuff, for me, is basically the computer doing the coloring for you. And it becomes very processed and very unilateral. So, again, it's just kind of a loose way to look at it. But I think it might help some people who are kind of new to the vernacular, how it all kind of interrelates. And sometimes I love Monk's abstract cubism. Those blocks just kind of splotched in there. Sometimes I love the way Parker can add so much detail to the eye, to the mane, to the underside. He just splashes so much life and enhances the simplicity of the coloring by numbers. He adds all kinds of complexity to that. Sometimes you're in the mood for just the simplest, most essential giraffe. Realism. So jazz has this way of extracting impressions of the giraffe that reflect the player and how they want to perceive the composition and how I'm going to approach it from. And sometimes jazz can be very impressionistic. Just a few lines and a few colors to make you contemplate, is that a boat on some water? Other times it's just a boat on some water. And so the player, the era, the what's happening at the time. It all kind of impacts how the giraffe will turn out. And I hope that helps a few people understand what bebop was, and the difference between bebop and hard bop, and the difference between bebop, hard bop, and the avant-garde free new thing. Avant-garde free and new thing, for the most part, abandons the constructs of the paint by numbers, the initial giraffe to begin with. The songbook isn't a big part of the avant-garde. The traditional American songbook, all the Broadway music, all those songs, bebop still was using those frameworks. Hard bop still use a lot of those frameworks. But by the time you get to Hancock and Albert Ayler and Archie Shepp and Pharoah Saunders, Cecil Taylor, Ornette Coleman, the giraffe is no longer what we're coloring. And some of us might color a zebra and have her do our own thing with our composition, and some of us, like I said, might just splash color on a piece of paper and call it art. And art is the beauty's in the eye of the beholder or the ear of the listener. And it's even possible to look at a piece of art one day and love it, and to look at a piece of art the next day and be kind of turned away by it. And music is absolutely that same dimension. This Hadda Brooks I'm playing, this is such a good record. And you want a great record, you can get for next to nothing this Hadda Brooks record. And you can get this for $5. And she's beautiful. And I was blown away by this record. I did a small episode on her probably last year at this time or so. And the versions of these tracks on here and her dreamy voice, it's so perfect. It's so excellent. It's a great cover as well. I believe it's on the Crown label. Yep, Crown. And it's not that hard to find. And this version of Dream is just killer. And then she goes into There's No Greater Love and My Romance. The Thrill Is Gone. It's really outstanding stuff. But these are very much giraffes. You can paint by numbers and know what these are. The impressions are very realistic. So I hope that helps a few people. Still waiting on this Savoy record to show up. The mail's kind of not good right now here in America. There's still holiday packages everywhere, I guess. So I'm still holding out and doing that soon. One other record I want to show you real quick is I got this Sonny Rollins record. It's a record I've had for a long time, a reissue of. But I found this old original pressing. And I got it for a real good price. It's got a couple hicks on it, but still I'm super thrilled to have this original in my collection now. This cover is one of those covers that just doesn't transcend on a modern cardboard. It just looks awful in its modern version. But when you see it in this older cardboard stock, the color, it's just more vibrant. It's more, even like the taped on parts on the modern version, just looks kind of corny. And on here that looks like real weathered tape almost. It's beautiful prestige stuff. And this record is taken from a few other sessions. It wasn't a tour de force session. By the time of 7207, Rollins was long gone from Prestige. He's probably having some success elsewhere at this point. Probably on the West Coast, 7207, 59 probably. Or is that 60 maybe? Probably 60. But yeah, these sessions are all from 56. And some of it's from Tour de Force record. I think 3 of the 4 songs are from that. And the rest of it's from Plays Bird. There's an outtake from that. So it's good Rollins, but if you have Tour de Force, you don't really need this. But again, it's nice to have the sequence and the original title of it as well. So that's a fun little piece. I will do an episode here soon on the stuff I got here for Christmas. I bought myself probably about 50 records, just because I needed to have some. Just needed it. So I dug in and bought a few things. But y'all be safe out there. Keep your head up. Turn off the television. Don't believe what your eyes and ears see and hear. Believe what your heart feels. You know, when it comes to politics, when it comes to all the things that we're asked to believe only what you can feel. You know what I mean? If it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. You know, especially when you remember that most people are really only worried about, are my kids home safe? Is there food in their stomachs? Are we all safe tonight? Me and my immediate family. The broader incentives to go out and commit wild acts, those things have to be fomented. They have to be kind of processed and require a long time of training and outrage, and then you can foment people to do dumb things. And if we didn't watch television, they'd have no control over us. You know, and sadly, our sitcoms and our reality shows and our adventure programs and our shows about police and cops, and there's so much politics and what they want you to believe woven into the fabric of all that as well. You know, it's really tough to watch a program and not have some indoctrination happening while you watch it. It's part of what makes Seinfeld such a great show, is there was no hugging and there was no learning. They never tried to teach you anything. And I don't need a television show teaching me my morality. I certainly don't need them teaching me my politics or who to be empathetic towards and when to be empathetic towards them. You know, empathy should extend to all people, especially people who haven't wronged you themselves. And to dismiss an entire nation of people or a religion of people or a race of people based off of some bullshit someone told you, didn't do your homework. You just didn't. And that's laziness on our parts. You know, I mean, a lot of times we don't really learn enough to put up our defenses to be able to have our own thoughts on things. And that's part of why education on your own, learning on your own, growing on your own, questioning things on your own. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. The truth is not something you can seek. You can't seek answers because there's a million people out there trying to give you answers, and most of their answers fit their agenda. What you seek is questions. And when you have good questions, then truth you will find. So question always. And here's a great question to start with. How can we make it so that the world no longer has to deal with hunger? How can we make everyone have clean water, healthcare, and education? We start asking those questions, but not just me and my group. But how can we make it so the world is more stable for everybody? That's going to make me safer. And it's going to bring us all closer together and make there to be less to be afraid of. In the long run, that's the solution, is unity with all of us and creating a level playing field with all of us that at least provides healthcare, education, clean water, and food. Beyond that, let the chips fall where they may. You know, the 1% of the world controls like 65% of the world's wealth. And the numbers even small in that it's staggering. I'm staggered by some of the things that you see when it comes to wealth distribution and America's top wealthy people and the top 10 wealthy people in the world, how much wealth they control. It's shocking. And if we part of a greater cosmic civilization, they ain't coming to talk to us until we figure that out. As long as we got 1% of the people controlling 80% of the wealth and the rest of us struggling to put food in our mouths, we have a long way to go before we can call ourselves a civilized people of the cosmos. We're dumb, primitives, primates. We're still apes yelping around, taking more coconuts for myself than you, even though half my coconuts are going to go bad because I got too many, and your kids are thirsty and hungry. We can't live like that. And we can't allow race and nation and religion to make it think, well, as long as me and my group are okay. That's small-mindedness, and that's how the rich keep us so under control. Because the bottom line is that divide in America that we see so strongly, it's nothing more than controlling people. And so you can wave your flag all you want, talk about how free you are, but if you believe only one side of the road and don't recognize there's another set of tires on the other side of this vehicle, that's also in the same cart tracks, you're naive. Because they've constructed both sides to not see or ever meet. And that's how we're going to continue going down that road. Divided and powerless to actually change. And here's the thing. If we just look at the left set of tires, we can want to go this way all we want. But until we convince this side to go with us, we still in this rut. We still in this rut. So America, set aside your divide, your vitriol, your ignorant fear and hate. And recognize that all Americans, immigrants, blacks, Mexicans, gays, Christians, Muslims, you know what we all want? Our kids home safe at night, food in our children's stomachs. Is your homework done, Billy? I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I ain't got no energy or time left to hate Iran. I ain't got no time left to hate blacks. I ain't got no time left to hate rednecks. I'm worried about me and my family and on the small scale, but I'm worried also about how can I make my family safer on the big scale by making sure we don't leave people desperate. Because desperate people creates crime, desperate people creates outrage, and then they fabricate this divide to keep us from being able to make any political changes that would change that setting so they can keep us controlled. And if you're controlled, you ain't free. Wave the flag all you want, you ain't free. And until freedom means something besides the opportunity for business to operate unfettered, don't throw freedom in my face. Because there's tons of people in the world much freer than y'all, believe it or not. Believe it or not. And if you just watch one side of the media, and you ain't even broad enough to even check in what the other side's saying, because neither side's telling the whole picture, they're both saying the slant of the one eye's perspective. It's with both eyes open that we can get more of a neutral slant on the image and have some idea of the real goings on. Y'all be safe. How do you like to paint your numbers by giraffe? How do you like to do it? What's your favorite kind of paint by numbers? You like it outside the lines? You like it inside the lines? You like that HArdman where it keeps the head inside the lines and the rest of the body, it does all kind of... It's an interesting way to look at it. And boy, Charlie Parker was a genius. You know, that's one of the things that I just come away from, whether he's playing with strings or playing with a hard bebop group. He's such an effortless genius. And it took Dizzy and all his intellectualism to break it down mathematically and explain it and teach people bebop. Parker didn't ever sit down there and analyze it and teach it. That wasn't his role. He just did it. He just did it. He was so comfortable with his weapon that he innovated all kinds of loop-de-loops and whirly-whirls that made him the fastest gun in the West. He could spin that sucker and still clap you down because he was so quick and so rehearsed and so effortless with what he did. And effortless and rehearsal, those are the things that kind of lead innovation. And innovation is not something you can force. And you can innovate a car all you want, but if it doesn't make it go faster, more economically, what are you doing? Square tires? Ooh, that's a great innovation. That's not going to make the car any better. You put seats on the hood of the car, you innovated. Doesn't make it good. You know what I mean? Putting blinkers on the bottom side of the car, indicators, as they would say in England. You put indicators underneath the car, ain't no one going to see those indications. So innovation is only as good as it is functional. And that's the key. Innovating in an effortless sense that makes people kind of come along and go, wow, why didn't I think of that? Because it's so natural when you do it. But then you try to do it and you go, damn. It's not as easy as I thought to make anti-lock brakes. I might have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what you did to do that. So Parker's a genius. And it's always so effortless. It's always so beautiful. And I got that Norman Granz 10-inch the other day from a great little friend on Discogs. He was selling some stuff off. He gave me this for a great price, along with a few other great things, which I'll show you more of in another episode. But even with strings, the beauty of Charlie Parker, he's truly one of the beautiful players. And the nice thing about his Norman Granz stuff is it has a nice sound quality to it, which some of the Parker stuff from earlier, it's tougher sounding. So y'all be safe, be blessed, put love in your hearts, understanding Learn something. Ask questions, most of all. And the first question you need to ask, like any good detective, is who benefits from this? And most of the constructs in the American politic, there is definitely a clear incentive and motivation for who's benefiting from it. And it ain't the American people. So stay divided at your own risk. You know what I mean? Stay divided at your own risk, because that's what the control is all about. And every time you see something on the news or on social media that makes your blood boil, you go, that's so outlandish, you got to recognize, yup. And that's why they posted it. That's why the liberals posted it. That's why the conservatives posted it. It's just meant to keep us from working together. And it works. It works. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And so, Biden, best of luck to you, brother. You know what I mean? Kamala, congratulations. Bottom of my heart. It's a relief to have this thing kind of closed and official. But like I said, Orange Sunset ain't going to go away. He'll be in our mouths and ears at least once every week to the entire 2021, mark my words. He'll make a headline at least once a week. Say something dumb, announce some new idea, start his own political party. He could tear this nation apart if he really sets his mind to it, just to validate his own ego. You know what I mean? Not because he cares about having his own nation. He just, see, a sociopath feels bruised. He needs to validate himself. There's no way you can't love me. They're lying to me. You know what I mean? He's literally convinced that the whole thing's lying to him. I wouldn't want to spend 5 minutes with that guy. You know what I mean? For all the politics that I believe in, I'd still like to talk with most of them. And even a guy like Dick Cheney, he's not an idiot, you know? And I probably wouldn't mind even hearing some of his theories on how he saw things and why he did what he did. It's hard not to see that money was his motivation, but this guy I would not want to spend 2 minutes talking to. I just find him so repugnant and so indignant and so unprepared for everything he wants to talk about. He just wings it. He just says whatever he thinks. And so sometimes it's just so insanely wrong. And sometimes it seems insanely calculated. Like, I know this is going to make these people thrilled. I don't believe it at all myself, but it's going to really stir them. And it's going to drive these people over here crazy. And I think that was his greatest calculation. I don't think he believes a lot of things he says. I think he just says them for the charge, for the reaction, and the political divide. And the further he went down that rabbit hole, the more I think he started to believe some of that stuff. And the more he started watching those conspiracy info wars and all that stuff, I think he started being swayed by some of that, because he's not super educated of his own wit and idea. He's very much an impressionable businessman, entrepreneur, who doesn't seem to have a great grasp of the broader realities. And it is what it is. So y'all be safe. May you live in interesting times. We got that. So enjoy the unfolding. Don't stress about it too much, because it is all by design. It is all by design. You know, I don't think they're planning people's deaths and shootings, but they know how to make somebody into a martyr for one side or the other. And that's exactly what they're doing. And it's fun to watch. Y'all be safe.